Department of Rhetoric and Composition. I've been here 14 years. It's a great pleasure to introduce Melanie Carter, a close friend, accomplished poet, and wonderful colleague. I first met Melanie in the late 90s in the Master of Fine Arts program at the University of Alabama. I was eking out a living and finishing up a book project. When I was discouraged, Melanie offered support and bolstered my spirit with her sense of humor. Melanie has published in respected journals, Gettysburg Review, Shenandoah, Hayden's Ferry, Spoon River, and the Greensboro Review, among others. She was a finalist for the Yale Younger Poets Prize, one of the most prestigious prizes for poets in the U.S., in both 2000 and 2001. She was nominated for the Pushcart Prize in 2003, 2007, and 2008, was included in the anthology of Best New Poets. She has also translated her passion for the craft of writing into innovative curriculum for our department, and the lower division courses as well as more advanced courses in our writing minor, advanced poetry writing and imagining the book. In 2012, she was awarded the Excellence in Teaching Award from AUC because of her commitment to teaching. This program today is a good example of how she encourages students to set a high standard for themselves and develop their creative talents. Please join me in welcoming Melanie and her students.
I want to start by thanking Dr. Rheotoric and the rest of the organizers of the El Mutanami Street Project. It is, on behalf of not only myself, but my students, a great honor to be part of it. My role here today, honestly, is to step out of the way and to allow the students who have been a part of the Imagining the Book course to share their manuscripts and their thoughts about how their endeavors speak to the ideas that the El Mutanami Street Project celebrates. But just by way of introduction, when Amanda Fields and I proposed Imagining the Book, we envisioned a course that would allow students to take a work in progress, a story or a series of poems, or perhaps an essay, or perhaps something that was done in a previous course, and to begin to develop it, addressing all the attendant questions of focus and structure and placement within the context of culture and genre into a long manuscript. This is, in short, what the course does. But what students begin with is almost never a work in progress. Rather, it's something much more fragile. An idea, a fragment of an idea, and sometimes just hope. So I'll ask you to imagine with me a group of students who hold in their fists just the seed of something, with a thorny, pointed end that prods and prods until, despite the threat of it being lost to wind or to a culture that can't sustain it, they open their hands. Imagine an idea turned loose. The imagination turned loose. It winds out into the city and beyond, and when caught by that wind, begins to rustle. It begins to sound when the rustling becomes words, like the start of a conversation in the world they want to have a say in. It roots that small seed, that fragile and dangerous idea in the writer, but in readers, other students, whose own pages begin to rustle in response. Imagine the most unquiet seasons, those springs, when books become able to speak and act and question what sort of force a book can be. The answers? Today we have several. Students who represent the work that happens for all students in the course. Assam Sultan and Nada Hello, whose creative manuscripts speak to the kinds of social issues that books can address. Dean Elabd, who was part of the course in 2012, whose stories became books in the world. And finally, Amina Award, who is currently a student in the course and whose book project speaks to to the importance of books within a culture and within us. Thank you all so much for being here. And without further ado, let's end.
Okay, my name is Hassan Sultan. I was inducted in this course last spring, and my book was called Book of Values. And in it I asked the reader to rethink our value system. I wanted to come out with a book that has that sort of reevaluates our value system in a timeless society. I chose Cairo as an example, of course, and I narrowed it down into a few stories of characters I've actually met or I've seen afar. I'm a student of anthropology. I just graduated, so that's why my focus is on social issues mainly. So through these stories, I try to remove what appears to be the actual problem with the kind of the problem that exists in society. For example, poverty or street children. Something obvious to us that street children are poor, and that's why they're in the streets. But there are depth into the problems. They have a whole life. They have a family. They have responsibilities. They have priorities. And all of these things, in the end, push that child into the street. And by the end of the book, I want the reader to reconsider his or her own priorities. I want them, in the end, to be able to actually write their own book of values after they have looked through my ideas. In my book, it's kind of, I tell a short story about a character, and then there's a commentary part or a section where it's a discussion platform. The part I'm going to read is the second section in my book, and it's about a girl called Samira. She's 9 years old and she's a street child. When I was asked to come here today to read this part, I went over the manuscript and I realized there's so much I want to change about what I wrote a year ago. So it's always in a process of development and growth, and the more you look at what you write, you want to change more. So without any ado, I'll just go ahead and read the part. Samira got on a public bus and found her way through the crowd until she reached a spot that she could fix her tiny, dirty feet in. She instantly turned towards a man sitting in a chair behind her, gazing at the street life through the window. His stiff structure looked as if it dried out from the amount of nicotine he consumes in each cigarette. His dark purple lips were mumbling with unheard words in that noisy bus. Tapping gently on his bony shoulder, Samira asked the old man for a pound. He frowned at the sight of her dirty yellow t-shirt. Then his lips suddenly threw a fierce shout, telling her to get lost. She flinched at the sharp metal-like nicotine breath. She gave it another try and asked, but with a more desperate tone this time. Our guy responded with a quick punch in the upper part of her bony chest and knocked her off balance. Before getting up again, she managed to install a fierce look on her face so that she does not look vulnerable and pitiful in front of everyone. Later that day, Samira approached me in a local cafe house in Zamalek that my friends and I just call it El Alam, simply because we never cared enough to know if it has a name of its own. My friends and I were having our warm drinks after a long, cold day. Samira stood a few centimeters away from our circle, examining each one of us before asking for a pound. Do you have a pound? I surprised her with the same question. She fixed her tiny eyes on me right away before starting to giggle. I asked her about her age afterwards, but she was satisfied with a grin showing her broken front tooth. For some reason, Samira decided that she will sit this one out. She didn't ask us for money anymore, so she dragged a chair from the next table and climbed on it with a heavy breath. Once she sat on a chair and got our undivided attention, she started a series of jokes making fun of everyone sitting. Abuya, my father, collects garbage, she said as she grabbed my friend's drink without asking him. Samira and her 4 siblings do not go to school. Since their mother sells vegetables in their neighborhood and barely makes any money herself, she supports her husband's decision in sending their kids out to work every day to bring home their dinner expenses. If we go to school, we will not eat, Samira further explained. Her eldest brother works as a porter in Mosque, a commercial market in the heart of Cairo. She explained that he looked too strong to beg people for money. What do you want to do when you grow up? I asked when she paused. A very typical question we ask most of the children we meet. A doctor so that I could help sick people. She answered with a pleasant smile. There are thousands of children like Samira everywhere, not just in Cairo or even Egypt. Their problem is also timeless. They are children on the street. How could we really help them? Thinking within the boundaries of help limits our ability to see the different aspects of the problem. It seems that the way we set our system of judgment might have been wrong from the get-go. If we include ourselves in the equation more often, this might help us figure it out. When we go to school or take a job, we take someone else's spot, simply because there isn't enough for all of us. The world we created is limited. Our system allows only a few people to have a good life. Only a few people have good jobs, afford quality education, or go to school to begin with. If the problem was that some do not work as hard, then why do we reward supervising jobs more than manual labor? These are questions that have different answers according to our political affiliations, economic view of the society, or maybe where our conscience takes us. However, there are millions of livelihoods affected by these answers every day. We compete. Samira is not in school while others are. She is not going to graduate with an IG certificate one day. So when she's 30, she's not going to compete on a senior marketing position. She's more likely to be competing for the same 20 pounds, maybe a little more given that she grew taller. Living and working in the streets will remain her life. I sound as if education is the core of our problems. Even though it's true that we can achieve a lot with our degrees, we have not been able to solve the oldest problem of history, poverty. However, this is not even about poverty. Our system works according to our rank in the society, which we acquire by how much money we have or the level of education we receive. For instance, how different does the security guy at McDonald's treat Samira if she decides to enter and another kid wearing a polo t-shirt and a pair of Nikes? Samira will be pushed outside right away. We have witnessed this scene one way or another. Everyone in the society pushes her back to the street. We push her to when we give her a pound or ignore to think about the depth behind the reasons that forced her back to the streets over and over. We blame Samira for the way she is. We blame her for being in a rank we forced her in.
Good afternoon. My name is Nada Hel. I am currently a student, graduating senior, studying Middle Eastern Studies. I was with Hossein in imagining the book 2 semesters ago. Just like Hossein's manuscript, mine tackled social and anthropological issues, but in a very different context because my story is situated in India. And as such, I'd like to give you a bit of context just so you can sort of follow up with what I'm saying. Inherent in India is a caste system that divides people based on not even social or economic economic hierarchies, but it's rather a hierarchy that's based on where you're born within the system. So there's, for example, the untouchables, who are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and the Brahmins who are at the top of the hierarchy. The main subjects of my story are the so-called untouchables, who are known as Dalits in India. And my story revolves around a 10-year-old boy named Raj. And I think, just for the purpose of giving it a bit of a context, I'm going to read you first an excerpt from my manuscript, and I'm going to talk about what I aim to do through the manuscript. And please keep in mind that when I wrote this, it was like the first experience of doing fiction writing, so it's not the best ever. But yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead. And also, sorry, there are a lot of Hindu words in here. So yeah, if I mispronounce them, I'm very sorry. But yeah, I'll try my best. The favorite time for Raj was every Sunday morning, when Papa didn't have to attend to some funeral or another, and the two would walk the morning earth to the village temple. On this particular Sunday, the light breeze carried the sense of morning meals and musky trees. The sun rays splashed over the amber sky. Papa and Raj walked in unity, smiles drawn across their drowsy faces. As the temple appeared on the horizon, Raj's legs extended to take the largest steps possible. But in due with Hindu traditions, he was careful not to run into the temple. Jolting, he battled to keep up with Papa's rapid strides. The rule was, whoever rings the gatna last must wash the dishes that day. Papa let Raj reach the gatna first. Amit, Papa, followed the footsteps of his son as the temple walls resonated with the gatna's ding, ding, ding. They folded their palms in unity, and each gently uttered, Jai Shri Krishna. The temple resonated with silence as the sun rays penetrated the temple's minute side window. Raj marveled in awe at the grandness of life. Almighty Krishna, who had transcended earth, stood at the heart of a small temple in Bihar, India, alongside a boy, a Dalit boy. Existence, as Raj understood through these tales of Hinduism, extended beyond our immediate lives. Papa and Raj entered the inner sanctuary of the temple, where Krishna's idol lay. Papa displayed Nivyada to Krishna and placed it at his feet as he whispered prayers to the idol. Raj followed suit. Sweets, Papaji, he would always say when asked to choose between fruits, flowers, and sweets for Nivyada. Raj, as usual, proceeded to finish his prayers in haste and ate the Nivyada, now prasad, as per Krishna's blessing. Raj sat in silence awaiting Papa to finish his prayers and eat his prasad, hoping he would be generous enough to donate his share to Raj. Surely enough, Papa acted accordingly. The two departed the holy walls and revolved around the temple 3 times before making their way again through the musky air of Bihar. Okay, so basically what I aim to do through the manuscript is operate on 3 different contexts. The first, the socio-anthropological, and the socio-political, and the religious/ontological context. Much like what Hussein did, I aim to basically deconstruct preconceived notions of what humanity is. What I aim to do is basically communicate the unity of all humanity, because what Raj does at the end of the manuscript is he manages to transcend the particular social and cultural boundaries of India and his condition as a Dalit boy, and he travels. So what I try to do here is to get the reader to engage a little with our understanding of what humanity is and other socially constructed notions such as discrimination and classism and poverty. Also, I think it's very important to note that Om, which is a force, I don't know how to describe this, but Om in Hinduism is a force that dictates how the universe operates. It's supposed to be basically composed of 3 main elements, or 3 gods actually: the god of creation, the god of maintenance, and the god of destruction. And my manuscript is divided as such, so I'm always narrating the story, but the story also operates on three different components. First, the creation and maintenance, and then destruction. And when I say destruction, not destruction per se, Raj does not get destructed, thankfully, but I mean destruction of these very, very eminent social constraints that he experiences. And yeah, I think I don't know, there's a lot to say, but it's just, it was very hard to do because I was first of all writing in a culture that I had never visited or seen. I had to engage in extensive research to be able to sort of deliver that kind of understanding of Indian culture, especially as pertaining to Dalits, who unfortunately face hardships on a daily basis in India, starting from what kinds of jobs they can occupy to their status in schools as children. Yeah, so as I said before, I try to focus on, or basically operate on three different contexts: the socio-anthropological, from basically wanting basically wanting to examine how we as humans interact with humanity and our cultural and social contexts, and challenge that to a great deal. And the social political context, because it's very important given that he's a Dalit. So again, I wanted to challenge the way we view people, especially ones who are forced within very constraining conditions of existence. And lastly, the religious and ontological. While it may seem odd that I chose a very particular environment, that of India and that of Hinduism, to convey a message that's supposed to be much bigger than that. It's supposed to be it's supposed to communicate to everyone, and one that's supposed to be timeless. I chose that in particular because that's the whole point, that the journey of Raj is supposed to be that of the readers as well, liberating oneself from the very grounded, socially constructed notions that we live by every day. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Dina Lapt and I was at AUC, just graduated about a year ago now. I graduated from mechanical engineering with a creative writing minor, and I went on to Cambridge, where I am now, to do an education degree specializing in critical approaches to children's literature. So it's quite a shift, as I'm sure you've noticed. And at my time here at AUC really changed what I wanted to do, from something engineering-based to something creative, or specifically education and children's literature-based. And I think this had very much to do with my professor and dear friend, Dr. Melanie, because I started this creative writing minor. I actually took a course with her, which was poetry. And after it, I began to notice, and she even helped point it out, that I would write a bit for children. Or perhaps it was easier for me to write for children. And I believe this runs in my family, because my mother has a nursery, and she's always loved kids, as she continuously reminds me as I get older. Anyways, so I started writing for children, and especially in imagining the book. I took that course in the spring semester, and it just so happened that during the winter, during my break, I had been thinking about starting a children's magazine in Egypt. I had started doing some research, and I believed that I would have to start it with a sort of series. I'm sure we know about a few children's series that exist in Egypt. We have the television one, like Bakkar, We had things, we had Mickey, which isn't exactly Egyptian, but we'll just say. And so I believe that I wanted to bring one forward to Egypt, which would really reflect Egyptian beliefs, which would be a good example for Egyptian children, which would not just be maybe a Disney movie sort of thing, where you got foreign ideals sort of imported in, perhaps Egyptian ideals as well. So this class was an amazing opportunity for me to start with what I had begun to envision. And this series ended up being called Farh and Faris. They're two brother and sister, and they're quite the troublemakers. And they're aged, I think, 11 and 14. And they live in Cairo, in Hindustan specifically. And they pretty much just get into a lot of trouble in every single, short story that they're in. And but the class helped me so much because I would write this sort of thing. We would all read it together, edit it, and I would see what actually resonated with mostly Egyptians I was sitting with. And what sounded a bit imported didn't sound really honestly Egyptian, I'd say. I also went to children who were growing up in these sorts of areas and had them also read my work, and they were the best critics, as I'm sure. Children are amazing. And they would tell me, this is very old-fashioned. Maybe this would happen during your day when you're a child, but in our day, this doesn't happen anymore. And I would have to then edit my stories. After the class, I had produced a few good pieces of, or at least approved by the children and others, pieces of work. And I went ahead, even before I graduated, to really put this magazine into shape. And I found a lot of AUCians who were very talented in whether it was journalism, creative writing, or graphic design, or marketing, and so many things. And we put together Kaleidoscope magazine. Somehow, I had myself applying to Cambridge without really thinking about it very much. And so I actually did get accepted as well. And what happened was that we had made about 7 issues when I had to leave. So sadly, things were put on hold then, and they are now. But we had reached the point where schools had subscribed to our magazines. We had individual subscribers, more than 100, where it was just so lovely to have, when we would call the parents up and they would say, oh no, I'm not really quite aware of the content of your magazine, but my child is, would you like to speak to him? And so we end up speaking to these children, and they'd be like, yes, we like the magazine very much, thank you for making it. And it was very cute, really, to get first-hand opinions on what was their favorite stories, who were their favorite writers, because it's not just that series, there are other series in here as well. Other short stories in here as well. And activities, it's just a children's magazine altogether. And the vision for it really was to reach out to Egyptian children growing up in Cairo and having them growing up with Egyptian literature, which would appeal to them, which would not only reflect their society back at them, perhaps in a different way, so that they could then critically reflect on their own society, but to give them the sort of vision that they could do something like this as well, that just like these troublemakers end up going really everywhere and doing all sorts of things, that perhaps they could do this sort of thing as well. I kind of feel obligated at the moment to read something to you, and I'm not really sure what to do about that. I just had 2 amazing students read very nice pieces of work. Alright, let's see. Okay, well, later on we had them in bags, so I'm going to have to go on the list open already. Okay, this is the very first one. I suppose it's introductory, it might help out a bit. It's called The Chase. Farh and Faris were 2 siblings who somehow always managed to make a great deal of trouble. This wasn't because they were bad kids. Farh was a confident, smart girl who prided her ability to talk with adults. Though she was only 11, you would usually find her reading the newspaper and drinking tea with her parents during breakfast. Faris, 14, would sit sleepily at breakfast unless discussing the latest football match. After all, They had two very strict parents. Mama Randa and Baba Hassan would always tell them to walk carefully to school and make no trouble. Sometimes, Farah wished they would just be normal parents and ask her to get good grades. Staying out of trouble was a great deal harder. Ferris always got her into trouble. As they walked to school, Farah's best friend Habiba walked beside them. "Are you ready for the game today, Farah?" she exclaimed, her ponytail bouncing up and down. "Yeah, of course. I looked up the rules of the game online," Farah replied. She talked about the details of the basketball game the classes were going to play against each other. Ferris rolled his eyes. "Are you sure you should be playing, Farah?" he asked. "Last time you played basketball, you broke a window." Habiba laughed, but Farah just crossed her arms and stomped ahead of them to school. Ferris looked after her, shaking his head. He honestly hoped that she would be careful playing. Farah always thought she knew everything, but she just didn't know how to play basketball. Nonetheless, he knew Farah could be very stubborn. He just hoped she wouldn't get them into trouble. Ferris went to school and attended his classes. By the end of the day, he had forgotten all about the game. That is, until he found Farah standing outside the school doors, surrounded by a group of boys, all shouting at her. "Oh no," Ferris mumbled as he rushed to the group. He tried to push his way to the middle where Farah was standing, but he couldn't get through. "What do you mean you didn't hurt him? You're the one who threw the ball," one boy shouted. The rest of the group cried their agreement. Many boys were shaking their heads angrily. "If he knew how to play, he wouldn't be with the nurse, putting bandages on his head," another boy cried, while others laughed. Farah's clear voice was heard throughout the crowd. "Actually, the ball hit the basket, bounced off, and then hit him. It was his own fault. He should have been looking at the ball, not his shoes." Ferris shook his head. This wasn't going to be good. Farah had to stop talking or else she would get seriously hurt. It continues. He ends up taking a motorcycle from one of the street, there are restaurants on the street where they have delivery bikes, and so he just takes one and saves his sister valiantly and rushes off with the police, the manager of the store, and the boys chasing him. So, and then his grandfather helps out at the end. So it's really just a bit unexpected, I hope, and something where they sort of have to face new challenges or unexpected situations in a way, as I'm sure all kids do, or at least to them it's still very brand new, in a way that at the end of the day is a bit with some sort of moral guideline. Thank you very much.
Just an introduction for the people who don't know me. My name is Amina and I'm a BCLT major. As you can tell by the major and the fact that I'm here speaking today, books occupy a significant part of my life, and for good reason. So, there are a lot of novels, essays, and stories that discuss the power and subsequent danger of books. It was too short there. Such books like Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, Violence Possession, and even Roald Dahl's Matilda, and Carol's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland cover this topic. For a medium rapidly and sadly dying out, dangerous books are, the idea of dangerous books are very much alive, which is why to this day books are still getting banned. My manuscript touches on this practice being set in a colossal library called The Forest, which was very much like the Nabi Street of the story. As many readers know, books have, at the risk of sounding cliche, of course, the ability to transport you to another world or give you the opportunity to live another life. Set over 1,000 years from now, when reading is almost obsolete, the forest contains these vessels. The power of which has been distorted and taken a little too literally by some. Trees out of which the books are made were thought to have provided this power of transportation and new life. But that's where they were mistaken, obviously. The power lies in words. and the books themselves are receptacles or capsules, if you may. Words, especially when chosen expertly, contain and present ideas, and ideas can be scary sometimes. We've seen words topple regimes as crowds of Tahrir, chanted poems written by Ahmed Fuad calling for freedom and equality. And on a more microcosmic level, we as readers have felt the influence and the impact of words. They can revolutionize your perspective, they can introduce you to new ideas, and they can change your outlook. Good books resonate within your consciousness, and great books leave you traumatized. Let me explain how my manuscript fits into this, or tries to embody this idea. After the library was destroyed and the books ripped apart, it was abandoned for about 3 years. After that, in an effort to salvage the books, the Court of Justice abolished the death penalty and, in collaboration with the Ministry of Culture, introduced exile to the forest. The crimes, regardless of their severity, were pardoned. The criminal could collect all the pages of one book, an often unyielding and almost impossible endeavor, because they finally realized that the contents of those papers were far more significant than any offense. Being a corrupt institution, however, the government stopped supplying food to the inmates, which ranged about 7 per year. My protagonist, much like myself, lacks certain social skills and keeps to herself most of the time. But unlike myself, she is a convict who resorts to cannibalism to survive exile. A decision I assure you she did not make easily. Her initial objective is, of course, escape, whether legally or not. And she collects the leaves of the books, trying to compile a book and able to apply for parole, but simultaneously looks for physical exit. Over time, she recognizes another means of escape, the books themselves. I won't give too much away about the plot, but the books that she compiles and reads transform and reshape her, as they always have done to the reader. She, just as we can with writers like Shakespeare, Homer, and Dante, is able, and books like Beowulf and Gilgamesh, of course, is able to lead through civilizations way before her time and still form a connection with the text. She is no longer a prisoner, but a traveler. And she is no longer surrounded by broken shelves and torn pages, but ideas and worlds that transport and transform her. That is how and why books are threatening. They endanger the mundane and the confining, and they jeopardize the world as you know it. A world of convention and monotony, giving you the space to experience what is different and what is new. Perhaps that's why they call it a novel. And that's what makes them dangerous and most beautiful. Thank you.
It's possible that some of you have questions for some of the students, or there are some other students in the course as well who are sitting in the audience, but I'm sure that any of them would be happy to answer any questions you have.
I want to thank the students for their wonderful presentations, but I have a question. In imagining the book, you wrote manuscripts, right? Did you also try to imagine the book like the cover, or illustrations, or notes to explain what Dalit is, you know? I mean, did you try to do that, or just, you know, the text itself?
For me personally, what I did was, because I was very much worried about having the reader lost and possibly abandon the manuscript, just because, you know, it has a lot of foreign ideas or very specific Hindu concepts. So what I did was I actually introduced it at the beginning of the manuscript, sort of like a glossary, like this is what a Dalit is, this is what a caste system is. And then there are other parts that are sort of in the middle that describe what a place is. It would be, for example, like some sort of like Hindu understanding of a temple, for example, and then I'd have like 2 lines just in the middle intersecting the manuscript, like the flow of the words just describing what it is.
But no pictures?
Not for me. I mean, the writing was enough of a challenge, honestly.
I thought about actually taking some pictures of the characters, because these characters are actually real. Samira, I've met her, Some of the things that are in the text are fictional, but the characters are real. I thought about that, but the time frame that we have for the course, it's just it's 2.5 hours a week, and you have a lot to cover, and you want something tangible at the end of the semester. So I think it was a little bit hard to imagine, for example, a cover or an introduction, but I think for example, I thought in the middle of the process, I thought about because I include in my discussion sections, I include facts and statistics, and I wanted to put a source in the end of the book saying that, well, I got these numbers from some citations. So I thought about this, but it was not. Not the cover, not the. Because the time is really an issue with the.
Do you know there is a film, a documentary film by Tehani Rashid, Banat Dole, on, I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah. It's on streets.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Well, Hossein, like you were reading the manuscripts and that's about you actually going to, in the near future, develop the entire book? Are you actually thinking about doing that?
Yes. I didn't write a book for the course. Actually, this idea I had in mind before the course, and it was actually completely different than what came out right now. I wanted to write a more academic type of book. When I talked to Dr. Melanie before the course started, I wanted to write an academic book, an anthropological, completely anthropological book. But then I realized that actually fiction and the way of storytelling in the book would help my cause in the end to develop this book of value that came out in the end as a book of value. And I think motivation is very crucial when writing such a long piece, and I bet we all agree on that. To be honest, I didn't write anything after the course was finished, but just when Dr. Nain told me about today, I started looking over it, and I'm like, well, maybe I need to write a little bit these days. So I see a book in the future.
Have you ever heard of a book named Taxi? If you haven't, it was about a man who went around when he was riding with taxi drivers and would hear their stories. For you, I would say the idea with your tone, the way I heard your manuscript, you think about also maybe trying to make a book like that where you go to different street children and then you hear their story. Like you heard Samira's story, that could be an idea for you.
Yes, and actually I tried to do that. I mean, I didn't read the other sections, but the first section was about a man in a broom. It's called A Man in a Broom. He's a guy that works in what do they call cleaners company. They sweep the streets and clean the streets. The third section is about a porter in the mosque, and these characters, I have interviewed many people, or I've seen their lives, and I collect from each person I've met, one way or another, and create this character in Samira. Samira is actually more than one person, more than one child per se. So yeah, I actually do that. So.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for being here today.
There's also the exhibit. If anybody has not seen the exhibit, it's worth seeing. It's quite